Up next, we proceed to our fireside chat, focusing on protecting vulnerable communities to ensure climate justice. Let us call in Ms. Shaharin Siddiqa Choueiti, YECAP Fellow, to moderate the discussion and introduce the panelists. The floor is now yours, Shaharin.
Thank you so much, Sisi. I am Shaharin Siddiqa Choueiti from Bangladesh. I'm an YECAP Fellow. And today we are in our fireside chat where we will learn about how to protect the vulnerable communities to ensure climate justice. So to the very beginning, I'd like to welcome the very amazing fellows we have with me. I have Sabah Rani Maharajan from Nepal, Henry Surya Wisna from Indonesia, and Prawa Chot from Thailand. So in the very beginning, I'd like to request them to introduce themselves, and starting with Sabah from Nepal.
Thank you very much for the floor, Choueiti. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Warm greetings and Jojolapa in my mother tongue. My name is Sabah Rani Maharajan from Nepal. Well, I am an indigenous youth activist, and I've been involved in various national as well as regional organizations in context to climate change. Well, some of them being Asia Indigenous Youth Platform. I am an executive council member there. And in Nepal, I am an executive member in Youth Federation of Indigenous Nationalities. And I also work with Nepal Red Cross Society. And currently I'm pursuing my master's in social work. Yeah, I'll end at this for my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Henry to give his introduction.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much for Choueiti for this opportunity, and nice to see you here around on the regional dialogue. And selamat siang, and is in Indonesian language. And matur suwun, and thank you. Matur suwun in Japanese means thank you. And first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Henry Surya Wijaksana, or shortly you can call me Henry. And I'm from Indonesia and currently working as a communications manager at the Indonesia Sustainable Agriculture Company, or PISAGRO. And besides that, on the voluntary one, I'm also just appointed as the Indonesian national focal point at Unify, the official youth constituency of UN Water, as well as to actively engage as the fellow, YECAP fellow, and also the other youth constituencies like Yango, CYMG, and also the Global Shapers Jakarta. And I think that's it. My short introduction. And over to you, Choueiti.
Thank you so much, Henry, for your amazing works. And now I'd like to move to Prawa for giving her amazing introduction and what she does.
Thank you, Choueiti. Hello, everyone. My name is Prawa Chewut. I'm from Thailand, and I am a biotechnology student. And I am working in YECAP Cohort 3 as a coordination team member. And I am also the part of UNICEF Young People Advisory Board on Climate Change and Environmental Issues. I live in the northern of Thailand, and I have faced many impacts on climate change. That's why I decided to organize the event to raise awareness about the climate change for young people in my communities. And I also volunteer when my hometown faced like the Wi-Fi crisis. Recently, I have started a startup projects on utilized agricultural waste to create health products. Yes, that's all mine.
Thank you so much. So as we have very limited time, let's move on to our fireside chat question and answer session. So my first question is to Sabah about what are the some key challenges faced by the vulnerable communities and in the face of climate change, and how can we ensure these communities are adequately protected?
Thank you very much for the floor and question, Choueiti. So, talking about the vulnerabilities, faced by the communities, regarding to climate change, well, I want to start with, the climate crisis. It has the effect in the entire continent, but then the effect is not equal. The people are burdened by poverty and oppression. They are at the more vulnerable and in the front of climate change, and also because they have the least capacity to cope against all of these consequences. And also we have to keep in mind that, they are the one who contribute very least regarding the greenhouse emission, but then they are the one who are affected very much by the climate crisis. And marginalized communities, especially indigenous people, people with disabilities, and women, children, and youth are very much vulnerable towards climate change because they have a very close relationship with the environment and its resources, right? So the increased frequency and intensity in the extreme weather events such as wildfires and droughts we are facing in Nepal, and these communities are at the front line of it, and because of that they are losing their food sources, their livelihoods, and also it is pushing them towards conflict, hunger, and poverty. So me being an indigenous youth myself and working for them, what climate change does is it jeopardizes the traditional life of indigenous people and also the traditional food systems of our, for example, if there is less snowfall in the northern side of the Nepal, then they lose this, food crops, and it leads to food crisis, right? And also, what the large scale initiatives do is they force the so-called, environmental, or let's say green projects in our land without proper ethic, free, prior, and informed consent. And what it does is, the indigenous communities there are forcibly evicted. They lose their land, they lose their livelihood and everything. So they are, more vulnerable towards it. And also, well, let's say in Nepal, the ownership of natural resources is vested in the state, right? So indigenous people, they are displaced from their ancestral lands, and they are prohibited from entering their land, which are now in the name of national parks and wildlife reserves. For I want to give an example in Nepal, in Chiton National Park, a youth named Rajkumar Chapang was actually murdered just because he was collecting some water snails. So we can see, the cost of indigenous people, what is the cost of life of indigenous people to the state. So these are some of the major problems that indigenous people are facing. And also due to the industrialization and major corporation, urbanization, the water resources of Nepal are being contaminated. And now talking about the challenges from a gender perspective, women, especially in the rural areas, they face period poverty because they have the lack to access of clean water, and then the basic access to sanitation. Because of that, they are facing life-threatening diseases, and it is very traumatizing, right? So these are some of the challenges faced by indigenous people. And also these indigenous people, they are dependent upon the natural resources for their survival. And because of the degradation of all of the climate and the resources, now they're sustainable, the job are being displaced. For example, indigenous fish folk, they have resisted, or let's say they depend upon the ponds and rivers for their occupations, right, for their food, and now they are being displaced. So it is a direct hamper toward their livelihood. And also we indigenous people, we are being criminalized and murdered, like I gave some example as well. And so in order to ensure, now moving towards the other part of the question that you asked, Chaiti, in order to ensure the community, to ensure the protection of those communities, what we have to do is, first of all, we have to respect the right of indigenous people that is enshrined in the international laws like ILO and UNDRIP. We have the right to self-determination, and the state needs to acknowledge that, the state needs to respect that, and only we can move forward. And we indigenous people, we do not conserve the nature merely for the profit. We conserve it because we love it, right? We respect it and we worship it. So that needs to be done. And so now it leads to an important question I want to ask, or let's say we need to reflect that we say, we should leave no one behind in this developmental projects or whatever we're doing right now. But then we have to question the government and ourselves, that how far have we come, in quest to achieve the developmental goal of leaving no one behind. So it is one of the critical question, and I would like to end here with the question, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your amazing input, Sabah. So on the light of Sabah said, the way Sabah said that leaving no one behind, I'd like to ask Henry that how can we ensure that the vulnerable communities have equitable access to resources and opportunities that enable them to adapt the impacts of climate change?
Okay, and thank you very much for the for this one for the opportunity and this answer, and this also having the challenging things that there's things that we able to support supporting this one. And at the end of the February 2022, the Intergovernmental Panel of on Climate Change, or IPCC, released that the sixth assessment report, that the sixth one, which must be of the concern to all parties. And the report is an important warning about the dangerous impacts of climate crisis that must be faced by humanity, and that in the next 2 decades, there will be an increase in global temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this also, that means that the IPCC report implies that without the meaningful decarbonization, global temperatures will rise to at least 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels within the next 2 decades. And to ensuring that the vulnerable communities are adequately protected, which there are some of the strategies that can be pursued. The first one is providing the education and also the adequate training to help communities to prepare for and adapt to climate change, such as introducing new agricultural techniques and also water conservation practices, as well as to educating the good agricultural practices, or GAP, for the smallholders in Asia and the Pacific here, with the inclusive inclusive closed loop, and also the inclusive approach. And the second one is we are to ensure that the vulnerable communities are adequately protected, is the improving access to healthcare, clean water, and also the other basic services, as that services is no more a privilege, but also is becoming the human rights. And the third one is ensuring that the vulnerable communities have access to the financial resources and also the financing techniques, such as the insurance or loans, to help them to recover from the economic impacts of the climate change, which becoming the effect in every countries, in every region in the Asia and Pacific. And the next one is promoting the policies that reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and also the limiting the extent of the climate change, which can help to prevent the worst impacts of the climate change on the vulnerable communities. And also, the one of the most important is the supporting and amplifying the voices of vulnerable communities in the decision-making processes, such as in the disabilities, indigenous people like Sabarani Mahanjan, which also part of the indigenous communities, and also the ethnic minorities, person with disabilities, and also the low-income person as well. That everyone should be participated in the decision-making processes, especially that the decision making that related into the climate change, to ensure that every decision making from the government and also the other communities, other things that responsible, can be ensured that their concerns and needs also are taken into the account as well. So this one is becoming the one of a few of the actionable things that we can do for ensuring that they are also they can protect it, especially vulnerable communities, not only in Indonesia but also in Malaysia, Singapore, in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, South Asia, and East Asia, and etc. So we are Asia and Pacific, despite having the heterogeneous, but we are also having the same concerns as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry, for your eye-opening input. And as Henry was saying, that the importance of inclusiveness, and when we talk about inclusiveness, we can talk about the climate justice. So my question is next to Pravewa, for that what role can the community-based approaches play in promoting climate justice? And how can we ensure that these approaches are really inclusive? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Shaidi, for your question. To answer the question, as I am a biotechnology student and an activist, I have seen firsthand the impact of climate change on my communities in the north of Thailand. The climate change has led to more frequent and intense weather effects, such as wildfire, flood, which disproportionately affect the vulnerable communities like a farmer and those living in rural area. But I also believe that there is hope through community-based approach. We can work together to address this challenge by create a more sustainable and equitable futures for everyone. By involving the local community in the process of addressing climate change, we can create like solution that we tailor to their specific needs, and challenge is not only promote like inclusivity, but is also ensure that the solutions are sustainable and effective in the long terms. For example, I have organized the event to raise awareness about climate change among the young people in my communities by involving them to like in conversation. We can inspire the future leader to take action toward climate justice. I have also worked with the farmer to utilize agricultural waste to create like health products, such as health to reduce the carbon footprint and generate more income. This approach not only address issue of waste management, but also provide the economics opportunity for a farmer. But it's important to remember that inclusivity is key. We need to involve diverse range in impact of climate change. This means working with local organization and the community to impact of the climate change. Yes. We also need to ensure that decision-making process participatory and democratic, where everyone's voice are heard and respect. The means create a safe and welcome space to discussion where people feel comfortable in sharing their ideas and concern. In conclusion, the community-based approach are crucial for promoting the climate justice by involve the community and promoting inclusivity. And we create a solution that how can be encourage greater public awareness, and what can individuals do to support vulnerable communities and promote positive change? That's all my side.
Thank you so much, Farewell, for your amazing input. And as you actually said that we need to ensure the voices are heard. So here we have a very amazing person from the indigenous community, Sabarani Maharajan herself. And I'd like to ask her that from her point of view, how can we ensure that the voices of the vulnerable communities are heard and their needs and priorities are in the development policies?
Thank you very much for asking such an important question, Chaiti. So as we're talking about, prioritizing needs in development policies, I want to begin with, what seems to be like a very simple question, but actually is not, we should reflect upon what development really is. In the first place, because personally for me, I don't think we have a concrete definition of development. It differs according to the context, right? For example, if you ask a person living in Europe what development means to them, it can be a different answer. But then for indigenous communities, vulnerable communities living in countries like Nepal or developing countries like Nepal, the definition of development differs, right? So, basically the policies, or let's say the proper development of the policies is done, according to me, it is done when actually it brings a positive change, or let's say positive impacts on the life of people, right? But then what we see is totally opposite of it. And so talking about ensuring the rights and the voices of vulnerable communities, the first and foremost thing the government needs to do is to be mindful and be accountable before bringing or implementing any plans or policies that may further amplify all the structural inequalities and systematic discrimination that the vulnerable communities are already facing, right, from ages and ages ago. So they need to be mindful about that. And another thing we really need to focus on is the continuous dialogue and consultation with the right holders. Now, I would like to focus on the term right holders, because we vulnerable communities, indigenous communities, are not merely a subject. We are the right holders, because all of these projects that in the name of green projects are being implemented in our land. So we are the right holder. And also, if some of the climate change adaptation programs are poorly designed, for example, there is this RED and RED plus initiatives, different initiatives, right, in the name of climate change adaptation. And if they are bought or they are designed poorly, then what it does is actually weakens the customary rights of indigenous people over their ancestral land, right, their natural resources. And so there is a need of government to actually establish a mechanism and a process to actually to do this comprehensive dialogue, and a meaningful dialogue, actually, not just merely a dialogue, but it should be very meaningful, and obtain FPIC. That I want to focus on FPIC. It needs to be done, and the consent of people needs to be taken before the projects are brought into their land, because they have a direct impact on their life. And also meaningful participation, like I said before, in the decision-making process, right? And also not only in national level, like definitely there should be a meaningful participation of indigenous communities, vulnerable communities, while preparing the NDCs, and also in the international high-level discussions such as COP and CBD and many more discussion like that. Because like I have always said, there is no climate justice without the inclusion of vulnerable communities. And as we are the right holder, nothing about us without us. We should be the one raising our voices ourselves, and not the government or not the private sector, not the business sector. It should be us. So that needs to be emphasized. And also, one of the major problem I see in Nepal and a lot of country is that the lack of awareness program in the mother tongue of various communities, right? Because in rural areas, a lot of indigenous community, they don't understand even the national language. Now, it is a far-fetched thing to think about them knowing the English language. They don't. So what needs to be done is all the awareness programs, they need to be translated into their mother tongue so that they can access them easily, they can understand it easily. And also now I want to emphasize on the role of international community. It plays a very important role, like implementation of international law. In case of Nepal has already ratified the ILO 169, UNDRIP in 2007. But when we talk about implementation, there is no proper implementation of it, right? So what the international communities like UN and other, forum has to do is take the government into accountability, right? So that to make sure that they implement all of the rights enshrined in this international laws, to make sure that the vulnerable communities are given their right and the rights of them are being ensured. So that is an important role to play by the international communities. And also I think the organizations such as UN needs to examine how their the human right of vulnerable communities are being held in the respective countries. So that, and sometimes we cannot trust not only the government but the law or the respected Supreme Court as well, because in the case of Nepal we have had many various events where we are criminalized when we talk about our rights. So that is when the international community comes along. So we need to build this very strong mechanism by the international communities and pressurize the government to implement those laws. So that is what I meant to say. And also to conclude, actually intersectional policies need to be developed as well, and it needs to be strengthened. And multi-stakeholder cooperation, also health ministry and international agency, they need to focus on these, so that also target on the respective SDG goals, and so that they benefit, so that all of these will benefit the vulnerable communities. And as we all know, indigenous people play a vital role in the ecosystem, right? They are the guardians of the nature, and we have our own ancestral knowledge to and the adaptive and mitigative measures toward the climate change. So lastly, what I want to say is we need to legally recognize the ancestral knowledge that indigenous people have, like in order for us to like achieve all the SDG goals, to make our earth more sustainable. That is the key. And not only us, but even the scientists have drawn the conclusion, right, that we cannot address the effects of climate change until and unless we safeguard the ancestral knowledge of indigenous people. So at last, yeah, I want to focus on that, and I want to end here. Thank you, Chaiti.
Thank you so much, Sabah, for your amazing input. And we can see that when Sabah was talking, she was actually prioritizing the role of international cooperation. So my next question is to Henry, that what role can international cooperation play in promoting climate justice, and what steps can be taken to promote greater collaboration and solidarity among the nations we are living?
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Chaiti from Bangladesh, for this important question. This also having the same important question for ensuring that the government has has the opportunity to giving an inclusive role to every vulnerable communities in Asia and the Pacific, for ensuring that we are strongly protected from the climate change as well. And first of all, I would like to sharing that ensuring that the vulnerable communities have equitable access to resources and opportunities that enable them to adapt to the impacts of the climate change is a multifaceted approach that takes into account their specific needs and challenges, that it becoming the important and it's becoming the urgencies. And here are some of the strategies that can be used to achieve this goal. And first of all is engaging with the local communities in Asia and the Pacific. And this is because it's important to involve the communities that will be affected by the climate change and the planning and also the decision-making processes. Then this can be done by engaging with the community leaders, conducting the community meetings, and also involving the local organizations and also the um, marginalized and vulnerable organizations and communities in the planning process as well. And the second one is identify and prioritize the vulnerable communities, because the vulnerable communities may include low-income communities, indigenous communities, and also communities of color, and also that identifying and prioritizing these communities that can help to ensure that they receive the resources and support they need to adapt to climate change. And the third one is providing the education and also awareness about the climate change and its impacts, which can help the vulnerable communities to understand the risks that they face and also the steps they can take to adapt. This can be done through the community workshops, public awareness campaigns, and also the educational initiatives. And also fourth one is providing access to funding and resources. This because the vulnerable communities may lack the financial resources and infrastructure needs to adapt to climate change as well. And this you can providing the access to the funding and resources such as the grants, loans, and also the technical assistance, which can help these communities to implement adaptation measures. And the fifth one is building the resilience in the vulnerable communities that can be helpful to able to help them to withstand the impacts of the climate change. That this can be include building the infrastructure that can withstand extreme weather events, developing drought-resistant crops, and also the implementing the water conservation measures. And lastly, that the important is the addressing the systemic inequalities such as the poverty, racism, and also discrimination that can help to ensure that the vulnerable communities have access to the resources and opportunities they need to adapt to climate change. And this can be done by advocating for the policies and programs that address these issues by supporting community-led initiatives that aim to build more equitable and sustainable communities. And overall, on ensuring equitable access to resources and opportunities for the vulnerable communities requires a comprehensive approach that addresses the unique challenges and needs of these communities by engaging with local communities, providing education and awareness, providing access to funding and resources, building resilience, and addressing systemic inequalities. We can help vulnerable communities, especially the government can help them to adapt and the impacts of the climate change. So, and I also would like to introduce to you some of the two systems that are reflected to this becoming the favorite system and also favorite scheme. The first one is this developed by my workplace and also is the consortium of Indonesian stakeholder multi-stakeholder partnership that it's called inclusive closed loop. Inclusive closed loop is one of the system, the scheme where the smallholders and also the SMEs is becoming the central uh, to get the impact while others, all of the stakeholders must took a part with their own roles to making sure that the this economic empowerment and also the sustainable development impacts can be take effect, and also can be given to the smallholders. And this also can be the vulnerable communities, including the indigenous communities, or also can be included to this scheme. And first of all, this government must make sure that every government that has to ensure that the regulations and also the facilities that can be provided to them, and the financial in the financial things, financial institutions can have to make sure that they can giving the access to the finance to the vulnerable communities as well, and also the access to the market that they have to providing the access for the education on the good agricultural practices, sustainable lifestyle for the addressing for the climate change, and etc. And also this becoming the one of the great way to addressing the food insecurity that is becoming the effect of the climate change as well. And the second one is to ensuring that the government has, and so we can be mindful that that already stated by the Sabarani Mahajan is that the mindfulness is becoming important. So I introduce to you a theory which is I take from the book or the presenting from the MIT Sloan, which is I know that the founder is a Mr. Otto, that the developer is Mr. Otto Sharma. That it's a theory that emphasizing the open mind, open heart, and also open will, and it's also going to the down and then going to the up. The first of all, we are seeing with the fresh eyes that we have to avoid the voice of the judgment. And then after the next step is we are sensing directly from the field, especially directly from the vulnerable and also the indigenous communities, which we have to, especially any stakeholders, have to avoid the voice of the cynicism. And then after that, we are letting go, which with avoiding the voice of fear, that we are starting to connect and also the download, the presencing, the connecting to the source, and also the connecting to the field. And then going to that the next step is a letting come, and then the next step is crystallizing with the vision and intention. We are having the new open heart, the new compassion, to having the new empathy, new perception from the field, and also from the direct stakeholders and also the vulnerable communities. And also the next one is a prototyping with linking hand, the heart, and also hand, that embodying us to any stakeholders, especially the vulnerable and also marginalized communities. So that the inclusive closed loop and also the theory is becoming a few of the best practices that we can do for ensuring that the vulnerable communities that can be ensured to be participated inclusively and also participated um, completely holistically to making sure that our policies are having the best effects for protecting us from the climate actions and even can dropping down the temperature rise into the more than below that 1.5 degrees, and also the reducing the carbon footprints that can be faster than the targeted in the Paris Agreement in 2015. And so I think that's it for me, and thank you very much. And I will give the floor to Shawin.
Thank you so much, Henry, for your amazing input and amazing speech. And right now, we have already noticed that the importance of encouraging public awareness or raising public awareness to ensure the vulnerable communities is really important. So my next question is to Prawewa, that how can we encourage the greater public awareness, and what can individuals like us do to support the vulnerable communities and promote the positive change?
Okay, thank you, Shetty, for your question. I believe that public awareness is crucial for promoting the positive change, but it's not just about the raise awareness. It's about the inspiring people to take action toward the climate justice. One way to encourage the greater public awareness is through education, is include teaching people about the science behind the climate change and its impact on the environmental and vulnerable communities and the action that we can take address it. But it's not just about the educate people, but it's also like about the empowering to take action. This means provide them with the tool and the resources they need to make the positive change in their own life and their communities. As individual, we can support the vulnerable to community by listening their voices and working with them to create like solution that address their specific need and challenge. This can include like volunteering the local organization or supporting sustainable business that prioritize environmental and social responsible. We can also promote like positive change by advocate for policies and practice that prioritize the climate justice. This means using our voice to demand change from our leaders or holding them accountable for their their actions. For example, as a member of UNICEF Young People Advisory Board on Climate Change and Environmental, I have working to advocate for policies and prioritize the need of vulnerable communities, include young people. Through my work with DCAP Cohort 3, I have also working to empowering youth in my community to take action toward climate justice. But it's important to remember that promoting positive change is collective effort. It's not just up to individual or specific organization, but it's up to all of us to working together toward a more sustainable and equitable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prawa and Sabah and Henry, for your amazing inputs. And it was a really nice chat. And I hope all of us have been really understood all of these topics we talked about. And if there is any questions regarding these topics, I think we will be checking those on the chat. And here we are concluding the session for the Fireside Chat.